Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about Dungeon Synth. What is Dungeon Synth? So in some regards it's very similar to black metal. In other regards it's the total opposite. So let's start with what differs from black metal. So first of all, it's not metal music at all. So you have no blast beats, no drums, no guitars, no tremolo picking, no harsh shrieking vocals like in black metal, because it's not metal music at all. It's electronic and ambient based music with instruments like synthesizers. But what is similar to black metal is the vibe. So the atmosphere is oftentimes very similar to black metal, so gloomy and somber atmosphere. And some dungeon synth tracks are used in many black metal releases as intros, interludes, and outros. Sometimes dungeon synth music has also been compared to the soundtrack of certain video games. And like black metal, it's oftentimes also set in a fantasy world or medieval world. What were the pioneers of the dungeon synth genre, and how is it related to black metal? So two pioneers of the genre were two artists of the early Norwegian black metal scene from the early 1990s, and those two artists were Mortis and Vagvikenes. So let's start with Mortis. Mortis was a member of Emperor, the black metal band, and he released some dungeon synth albums in the mid 90s. So the first one was in 1993 with Født til å herske. I hope I didn't butcher this Norwegian title, Norwegian name. It means Born to Rule, and he also released some other dungeon synth albums in the mid 90s. The other artist is Vagvikenes, the infamous artist from Burzum, and he also released two dungeon synth albums in the late 90s, and those were Daudi Baldres and Hlitskalf. I hope I didn't butcher those names also. The meaning is the death of Balder, the god, and Hlitskalf is the throne of Odin. So those are his so-called prison albums. So he recorded those albums when he was in prison, and he didn't have any access to guitars, drums, bass guitar, and instruments which are normally used for black metal music, and he only had access to synthesizers, keyboards, stuff like that. One other early pioneer of the dungeon synth genre is an artist called Jim Kirkwood. So he didn't have anything to do with the Norwegian black metal scene or the black metal scene in general, but he also released dungeon synth albums in the early 90s. So what were the influences of dungeon synth? So the influences can mostly be found in electronical and ambient music of the 1970s and 80s. So stuff like, for example, Klaus Schulze, Tangerine Dream, so like the Berlin school of electronical music. You also have, for example, the German band Kraftwerk. You also have bands like, for example, Dead Can Dance, especially their 1987 album Within a Realm of a Dying Sun. And Vagvikenes, for example, also cited his influences as the German band Das Ich, and also even the classical composer of classical music in the 19th century, Tchaikovsky, a Russian composer. So a very wide range of influences you have with the dungeon synth genre. So what are some albums and bands you should check out if you're interested in this genre? I would recommend you go here on YouTube to the Dungeon Synth archives, where you can check out hundreds and hundreds of albums. So for me, it's impossible to keep up with new releases, but I can recommend you some personal favorites of mine. And I would recommend, for example, the band Depressive Silence from Germany. I would recommend the album Depressive Silence 2 with the track Forest of Eternity, which is, in my opinion, one of the quintessential tracks when it comes to Dungeon Synth. You can go to the Dungeon Synth archives and just rank it by most liked, and I think you find this one of the first albums. One other artist I could recommend is, for example, A Secret Stairways. He released, for example, the album Enchantment of the Ring in 97 and Turning Point in 99. Also, in my opinion, quintessential albums when it comes to this genre. Other bands and artists I would recommend are, for example, Arturos, for example, with their albums Ultra Romance and Astralae. And the Australian band or artist Questmaster. They have a variety of different releases. Let's see what else is there. You also have Summoning, the Austrian black metal band. They also did some pure Dungeon Synth releases. And what else? What are some? For example, also Midnight Odyssey with their album, how's it called? Ruins of a Celestial Fire. This is one of their best albums, but they also have some other good ones. So you can check out, for example, those artists. So this is just my personal favorites. And one other offshoot of this genre of Dungeon Synth is so-called Comfy Synth. So it's related to Dungeon Synth, of course, but what differs from normal Dungeon Synth is like you have a different vibe, a different atmosphere. So you don't have like the gloomy, somber black metal, typical black metal atmosphere with realms in the fantasy world or medieval world, but more like a very nostalgic vibe, where you reminiscence about your past, certain nostalgic feelings of your childhood, for example. And yeah, it's more in this vibe. And you can also check out, similar to the Dungeon Synth archives, you also have the Comfy Synth archives. So I would recommend also check out this site with many albums. One artist I can recommend, for example, is Grandma's Cottage, especially their first two albums I like very much. I hope you found this video informative. Next, I will post my powerlifting meet recap. I had a powerlifting meet a couple of days ago, a regional meet of Salzburg and Carinthia. So those are two states in my home country of Austria. I placed third in my weight class. Yeah, I will keep you updated soon about that. Like, comment, subscribe to my channel if you like my content, and see you soon.